My marriage to Maria seemed vibrant, fueled by the energy she brought to every aspect of our lives. She was intellectual-driven and strong-willed, a woman who knew what she wanted. We'd been married for several years, and I was utterly convinced I knew her as well as I knew myself. Looking back, I realize how deeply mistaken I was. I couldn't have imagined what lay ahead. We lived a comfortable life. Maria worked in an office downtown, while I worked from home as a software developer. My flexible schedule allowed me more time at home, while she built her career. Immersed in a fast-paced environment and constant interaction, I preferred the calm quiet and predictability of our home. Maria, on the other hand, thrived in the bustling atmosphere of the office. These differences, I thought, created a perfect harmony. We complemented each other, two halves of a whole. I've always been a man of principle, believing in discipline, commitment, and order. Marriage, to me, was a partnership built on absolute trust and shared life goals. I abhor drama, have never liked surprises, and always strive to do the right thing, expecting the same from Maria. I considered her the one person who would never betray me, and perhaps it was this blind faith that prevented me from seeing what was happening right under my nose. Unlike me, Maria was sociable and outgoing. She easily connected with people, constantly generating new ideas and projects. Her extroverted energy seemed to balance my more introverted nature. She encouraged me to step out of my comfort zone, and I believed this only strengthened our relationship. However, things began to change, and I didn't notice. There were no obvious signs. How could I have seen them? I trusted her implicitly, never entertaining the thought of possible betrayal. One aspect of our relationship ultimately shaped its fate. After several years of unsuccessful attempts to conceive, we learned of my infertility. We underwent all the necessary tests, and the verdict was clear: my chances of becoming a biological father were extremely slim. It was one of the hardest blows I'd ever received. A blow to my pride, a disruption of my sense of control and stability. Maria, however, reacted with unexpected calmness. She took the news much easier than I did, saying it changed nothing between us, and that we could always consider adoption. While I wrestled with the weight of my diagnosis, Maria was already looking for solutions. She'd always been that way, practical, ready to face any challenge. Her attitude helped me cope, and in time I came to terms with it. We began discussing adoption, imagining how we would build our family, taking our time. But even after accepting this new reality, I couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy. I didn't tell Maria, but deep down I felt flawed. The inability to have children naturally was something that weighed heavily on me as a man. I hid these feelings, unwilling to show weakness, especially since Maria seemed to have fully accepted the situation. She never expressed dissatisfaction and often reiterated that our love and commitment were what truly mattered. Back then, her words comforted me, and I believed we were firmly on this path together. Another significant shift was that after the news of my infertility, we stopped using contraception. There was no need. It became our habit. At first, it felt unusual, but over time it became the norm. Oddly enough, we even felt closer, freed from the worries that burden other couples. This new arrangement continued for several years. We didn't question it, it seemed settled. Maria even occasionally mentioned how glad she was that she didn't have to worry about it anymore. As far as I was concerned, everything was fine. But, as they say, trust is a dangerous thing. It was because of my boundless trust in Maria that I suspected nothing. I considered our marriage a model of overcoming adversity, especially after we dealt with the infertility issue together. She seemed happy, successful at work, and our relationship, at least outwardly, was stable. However, something was happening in the shadows, and I was blind to it. Small signs, now glaringly obvious, subtle changes in her behavior that I hadn't noticed at the time. Then, one day everything changed. My world collapsed. I don't want to reveal all the details now, but what I discovered that day shattered my perception of our relationship, of who I thought I was, and even more frighteningly, of who Maria really was. The issue that seemed resolved, my infertility, became the catalyst for one of the most shocking moments of my life. Suddenly, I began to question everything. How had I not noticed before? How could someone so close to me conceal something so significant? The ensuing events sent me reeling, but ironically, they also forced me to open my eyes to what I had refused to see. Looking back, I realize how much I took at face value, especially regarding our relationship and our way of life. I always believed in the strength of our bond, built on mutual trust. After all, we had so many deep conversations, reached agreements about life, the future, and my infertility. I thought we had found a balance that suited us both. I was a man who valued structure, consistency, and our life was adapted to that. I trusted Maria implicitly, believing in our complete harmony. However, over time, this absolute trust, which I considered the foundation of our union, became the very thing that blinded me, preventing me from seeing the true state of affairs. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a shadow gradually taking shape, but one you initially choose to ignore. Maria began staying late at work, citing a new project. She was involved in something important, something that, according to her, could define her career. It sounded plausible, and who was I to doubt her dedication? But, as they say, the devil is in the details, and these minor changes, which seemed insignificant at first, began to grow, transforming into something much more serious. Maria, my wife, was constantly disappearing at work. Her late evenings became more frequent, and I soon realized they weren't isolated incidents. Initially, I attributed it to work demands, as something inevitable on the path to the success she so desired. She spoke of a crucial project requiring complete dedication. This was her moment, and as an understanding husband, I didn't want to interfere with her giving her all. But then the late returns became systematic, and my intuition began to send signals, like a quiet alarm bell that I stubbornly ignored. Working from home, I had a stable schedule and could observe the changes in her behavior, but always found a rational explanation for each of them. Maria had always been ambitious, and this new project seemed to be the very opportunity she had been waiting for years. This was her moment, and as her husband, I had to support her. I knew how much her work meant to her, so I tried not to bother her with silly suspicions. However, as the evenings grew longer and the time spent together diminished, I began to notice small details. She came home tired, but not just from work. There was something else, a kind of unease that I couldn't define then, but which I now see clearly as a shift in her demeanor. Still, I brushed these thoughts aside because the very idea of doubting our relationship seemed absurd. I trusted her, and in my mind, that trust was unshakable. And then came that night. The night that changed everything. Maria came home much later than usual, severely intoxicated, barely able to stand. I had never seen her like that. It was a shock. She hardly ever drank, and if she did, it was always very moderately, only on special occasions, and always in our company. Seeing my wife stumbling at the doorstep without her bag, with glazed eyes and a strong smell of alcohol, was the first clear sign that something was very wrong. I helped her to bed without asking questions. Watching her sleep, I began to think frantically. Why was she in such a state? Who was she with? And why did she allow herself to get so drunk? Questions swarmed in my head, and for the first time, I doubted her stories about work. Something was amiss. My mind tried to find an excuse for what happened, but my heart suggested something more was behind it. But I kept my suspicions to myself. I needed proof. The distrust I had suppressed for so long began to take shape that night. The next morning, I didn't say anything directly. I decided to observe, but the truth was that even if I wanted to avoid it, the seed of doubt had already been sown and was sprouting with every minute. In the following days, I began to monitor her behavior more closely. Her daily routine seemed normal at first glance, but for me, everything was different. I began to suspect every little thing, to question every one of her absences. Weeks turned into a mixture of vigilance and observation. When you realize something is wrong, it's impossible to ignore it. I started noticing more and more signs that a parallel life was unfolding right before my eyes. It happened on a Saturday. I stumbled upon something I never wanted to see. While cleaning her car, I looked in the glove compartment. Among the papers, receipts, and small items, I discovered something strange, a package of condoms opened, with some missing. The package was a clue. But what I found immediately after was even worse: a used condom hidden at the bottom of the glove compartment. The gravity of the situation was undeniable. I understood what it meant. She was cheating on me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. We hadn't used condoms for years because there was no need due to my infertility. There was no explanation for this. Everything fell into place in an instant. All those late returns from work, the important project taking up so much time, the excuses, it was all a lie. Anger surged within me, cold and calculating. I had been betrayed, and the truth lay right in front of me. But instead of immediately making a scene and letting it all end like that, something in me shifted. I realized I had to act. Consumed by a desire for revenge, I decided she would pay for this. If she wanted to continue her infidelity, she would suffer the consequences, but not in the way she expected. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to face the results of her betrayal. A plan began to form in my head, cold and calculated. I took the pack of condoms and did what, in that moment of anger, seemed justified. I pricked each condom with a needle, returned the package to its place, trying not to arouse suspicion. I knew that if she continued to cheat, this infidelity would have a price she couldn't ignore. But this was only the beginning. I had bigger plans. I couldn't stop there. I needed to do more. I began to wait for the right moment to strike with maximum effect. She had an important presentation at work, what she called the pinnacle of her career. I knew this was the perfect opportunity to retaliate. The night before the presentation, while she was at the office, I did everything necessary. I called the bank and blocked her credit card, reporting it as compromised. This cut off her access to money the next day. Then I punctured the tires of her car. Everything was ready for her world to crumble. The next morning, everything went according to plan. She woke up in a hurry and quickly realized something was wrong. The car was unusable, and she had to call a taxi at the last minute. Moreover, her card didn't work. As a result, she was late, in complete despair, unaware that her life was about to collapse, and I knew the damage was already done. Maria returned home defeated, disappointed, a loser, and a heavy silence hung between us. And for the first time in many years, I didn't see that sparkle in her eyes that she usually radiated. She wasn't just lying to me, she was cheating. Our trust, our marriage, and everything we had fought for was destroyed, and this was only the beginning. I remained calm, not making a scene, but carefully observing her every move, waiting for the next step. Deep down, I understood that this revenge wouldn't dull the pain of betrayal, but at that moment, the sense of control was what I needed. I watched her with cold calmness as she, unsuspecting, fell deeper into the trap I had set. The culmination came when I noticed her anxiety, the constant checking of her period tracking app. When the delay became obvious, and the morning sickness regular, all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The truth was clear, she was pregnant. But the thing is, this child wasn't mine. She knew it, and the look of panic on her face confirmed all my suspicions. That's when I decided it was time to talk to her. I sat down next to her while she was looking at her phone, pretending everything was normal. My voice was even, restrained, but with cold notes she had never heard before. I asked directly, "How does it feel to carry another man's child?" The shock in her eyes was instantaneous. She tried to deny it, stammered apologies, but there was no more room for lies. The game was over. She begged me to listen, tried to justify the unjustifiable, but I wasn't interested. Her tears no longer touched me. I had already made my decision. And now she had to pay for her choice. The denouement came when I decided to kick her out of the house. I remember every detail. I threw her things out one by one while she pleaded, clinging to the last shred of hope. But I was adamant. This was the end. She had betrayed the most sacred thing, the trust between us, and now she was paying for it. Without a word, I stood up and went to the bedroom. I started gathering her things, clothes, shoes, everything that belonged to her, and threw it into the hallway. She tried to stop me, but I wouldn't let her. With every item falling to the floor, she realized that her world was collapsing, just as mine had collapsed when I learned of her infidelity. "You made your choice," I said. "Now live with the consequences." Maria looked at me with despair in her eyes, but I had no more words for her. The betrayal was too deep, and now she was reaping what she had sown. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: there was no longer a place for her in my life. Every action has consequences, and now she faced the devastating consequences of her choice. The divorce was quick, but the emotional wound took a long time to heal, and Maria's story after our separation became even more tragic. She decided to have an abortion, which led to an irreparable rift with her deeply religious family. This decision, made in the chaos she herself created, was the final blow. Maria was left alone, completely isolated, without support. I moved on. I went through a period of personal recovery. I needed to learn to be myself again. I found solace in my work, strengthened ties with friends I had neglected, and most importantly, redefined my identity. It was a painful but necessary process. I returned to the activities I loved and discovered new hobbies, such as hiking and painting, which gave me a new perspective on life. While I was recovering, Maria's life seemed to be crumbling further. Isolation left her lost. She lost contact with many close people. Loneliness and the consequences of her choices dragged her down, plunging her into an abyss of regret. But this story isn't just about betrayal and breakup. It's a story about what I learned from this experience. The most important lesson is about the fragility of trust. Once broken, it's almost impossible to restore. I learned to be more vigilant, not to ignore the signs, and to value my own self-worth. Respect and commitment are the foundation of any relationship, and when these foundations are undermined, everything else crumbles. Another valuable lesson concerned self-respect. During the marriage, I lost myself in a relationship that ultimately didn't respect me. Moving on, I realized how important it is to put my own needs first, not to sacrifice myself for something that isn't worth it. Life is a chain of choices. Maria made her choice, and I made mine. And in the end, I understand that these choices led us down different, but necessary paths. I emerged from this ordeal stronger, wiser, and with a clearer understanding of what I truly want and deserve in life. Now I move forward with my head held high, no longer willing to compromise my principles, ready to embrace a future where honesty and respect are the top priorities.